Welcome to Not Another CEO podcast. I'm your host, David Politis. Every week, we talk to inspiring leaders and get the true stories, the ups and downs, the lessons learned, and come away with actionable advice for our own journeys. Today's guest is someone who truly defines the entrepreneurial spirit. He started and sold 4 successful companies over the course of his 25-year career. His most recent company automates and optimizes commission plans. Earlier this year, he sold that company to Salesforce for about $500 million. Please welcome founder and CEO of Spiff and now SVP of product at Salesforce, Jeron Paul. Hey man, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much, David. It's wonderful to be here with you today.
Awesome. Let's get started with the first question. So, what's one thing that you've done at Spiff, big or small, that's had the biggest impact and that you'll absolutely do again if you're CEO of another company in the future, which I'm going to guess that you will be?
Hey, well, I appreciate it. I'm just waiting I'm just waiting for that time when I can join you on your next gig. I mean, I think that's what the plan is, right? I mean,
Yeah,
we got to talk about that offline. We're going to talk about equity splits after this, but um, no, appreciate it. I think I think the biggest thing for me is assembling the executive team. I feel like that a great CEO really is measured by the quality of the team that they surround themselves with, that S team, that senior level right around themselves. And so I think that doing that, obsessing over that, spending most of your time like focused on getting the right folks in the right seats at that level will have this trickle down effect that really will define, or at least really, yeah, I think define your chances of success more than any other thing you do. And I would even throw it up there with maybe compare and contrast it with spending a lot of time making sure that executive team is really high functioning. That's also a great use of time for a CEO. But I would say most importantly is getting the right folks in those seats, even before trying to optimize how the team performs as a group.
I have a lot of questions about this, having gone through this myself many times. When you think about finding those people, where have you had the most success in finding that senior team?
Early in my career, kind of when as a younger entrepreneur, as you mentioned, sold multiple companies. In the earlier iterations of doing that, I feel like I really focused on my own personal network. And I think that's fine. I mean, it's pretty natural to focus on folks, but as I got more seasoned and raised, and targeted larger outcomes and raised venture capital from larger funds, like in this most recent round with Salesforce, or in this most recent, company with Spiff, raised from Lightspeed, Norwest, Salesforce, some larger funds. I feel like I actually really grew in my appreciation of using a headhunting firm. So, we used we used Renaissance, and then we used Diversa partners pretty frequently. So much so that I actually gave equity to one of the partners at Diversa that I worked with so frequently in finding some talent during a period of rapid growth for Spiff, that I really wanted this person, who was Gary Constance. So if Gary ever hears this, shout out to Gary, love him. I had such a great time working with Gary that I really wanted him to kind of be proactively thinking about our hiring needs, even when he wasn't under contract. And so I think that was one of the big learnings I had around how to find them.
So these headhunting firms, I mean, when I talk to especially people earlier in their career, first-time CEOs, actually, when I think about myself, first-time CEO, and someone said, you should go use one of these headhunting firms, these search firms. And I got the proposal from the search firm, and it was, $100,000
Yep.
plus to find someone. It was hard to swallow that type of a number. And I know that talking to other, founders, they say, I'm going to spend $100,000 plus to find someone, and it's contingent. I have to pay it up front. And, does that, how do you, how do you reconcile that and that kind of price tag with the process?
Yeah, I mean, so many things I want to say about this, but I love the question because I think we all have that visceral reaction, and it actually gets kind of worse, David, because you pay the fee, and then you still have to pay the. It's not like it comes out of the salary of the individual that
Yeah,
you're
exactly.
hiring. So I mean, you're also hiring these really high powered folks that come with pretty high salary and equity expectations. So I mean, having built and run startups at multiple different levels of outcomes, I mean, you got to always step back and be like, what am I trying to do here? Am I trying to build a lifestyle business, or am I trying to build a venture backed startup that's going to go get
Mm,
acquired for $500 million, $1 billion, multiple billions of dollars? And now I'm putting myself more in that mindset of, hey, I want to build a really big outcome here. Then I'm reminded of like a quote that was kind of attributed to supposedly when Christopher Columbus went to go raise money to see if he could finance his venture to find a new path to the Indies. Supposedly he was rejected, but then there was a Jesuit priest who kind of came back and convinced the powers that be at the time to finance the deal. And one of the things that the priest said was that that in light of the potential upside of success, that the cost was very minimal. And
mm,
I think
mm,
to finance a couple of ships to go look for this path to the Indies, and so I look at that as very similar when you're thinking about hiring these individuals at this level. I mean, there's literally no bigger ROI lever that I can imagine in a
mm,
than getting the best head of marketing, the best head of sales, the best head of product. I mean, you're going to the amount of return, and in fact, I think we get a little wrapped, we get a little hyper focused on cost in the wrong areas, and this is one area where I just think this is an obvious truth. Even if you're going to end up paying this, let's say you get an incredible head of sales and you're going to end up paying them all in something like 500 grand, and you're going to end up paying 125 grand to go find them. But they're going to take your sales from 10 million in ARR to 50. I mean, clearly something's off in how you're thinking about things mathematically if you don't see that this is the good use of some funds. You know what I mean? Now, again, you have to find the right person. One other thing I would say, David, I want to kind of highlight, it's really funny how often we didn't end up going with any of the candidates that the search firm found, that we ended up going with a candidate that came through our network, not necessarily my personal network, but maybe
mm,
we had an incredible board member from Norwest who was constantly sourcing leads for us. And a lot of times we ended up taking that candidate over some of the candidates that were sourced by the search firm.
mm,
But I would still say use the search firm because it made it so easy to identify talent very quickly and to benchmark these
mm.
folks against each other, so that it made the process a lot smoother, a lot quicker, and it allowed me to get to conviction on who I was going to trust in these roles very rapidly.
So I agree with you. I actually think something you said there is so interesting is even if you don't hire the person from the search, you're getting all these candidates in. The other thing that I've noticed is when you hire a search firm, it officially starts a process and it gets everyone very focused on that process because now you've put the money out. You have a search firm who's delivering candidates to you. And in many ways, it actually forces a bunch of other conversations that might, you're so busy, you're doing this and that, and maybe you're sourcing a little bit here and there. But when you have the search firm, it makes a big difference. Let me ask you a question on the search firm front. Do you believe that it's the search firm or is it the partner? You mentioned this partner you worked with, like, is and you've worked with sounds like a number of search firms. Do you think
Hmm.
it is the search firm or the partner that really makes the difference?
It's always going to be the partner, but there are firms that have a very deep bench of talent, and so you know I I've been pretty impressed with, for example, I mentioned Diversa to you.
Right.
I've been very impressed with them as a firm because I have had I have had a couple of times. I've worked with them a couple of times where my preferred partner was so busy that that he informed me, hey, I may not be able to give the same level of attention that I normally would to a search. And so,
Mm,
but then he's introduced some of the folks that he has mentored, and they've been great too. So, I do think it's ultimately the partner, but the firm matters and it is important.
mm-hmm.
And certain firms are really in the flow of information. That's the other thing is, Diverse is really well known in GTM roles. Um, Frankly, they're not as well known in some of the technical hiring, so like CTO and some of those other areas. I know they're probably gonna kill me for saying that, but there are some other firms that are more in the flow of sourcing and placing candidates in more technical roles,
Mm, mm,
and so the firms do develop these lanes that they swim in and lanes of expertise, and so that's important for you to recognize. And what I found is firms like Lightspeed in Norwest, some of these larger venture firms will often have an HR partner or a partner that,
yes.
yeah, that can really work with you on a search. I found that to be enormously valuable because, again, there's nothing more important than putting together this incredibly high performing executive team, which starts with finding the right candidate. That's kind of 90% of the battle's over if you just find the right candidate. So you really can't overinvest in this search process. You really
Mm,
can't. And so we would hire a firm, we would leverage the board like crazy, and we would leverage all the HR partners at all the venture firms that we work with. So we would often have on these search calls, it was funny and it was a little weird at times because I would be on a call sometimes with like 10 other folks to just hire one person.
mm,
So it
mm,
felt like this really, sometimes it felt like there were almost too many people on the call. You know what I mean?
mm.
But again, I don't think you can really overinvest in hiring in the search process.
I also think having your investors, when the investors are on the call, what I found is the search firms react differently when you
They
have an
do.
investor on a call, and that investor is probably sending 10 searches, a quarter to the search firm,
Agreed.
and I've noticed that as well. I think that's actually really good advice for people is having your investors on those calls. Maybe not all of them, but having them there really does drive a different level of accountability for the search firm, and so that's really good advice. Actually, no one has said this yet on any of the episodes. I think that's important. One last question about the actual search process.
The talent partner. So I would have the partners, so I would have the board members of Spiff from Lightspeed. I had Arsham from Norwest. I had Sean Jacobson. I would have them attend, but I would also have again, they would have this operating partner that was like head of HR.
Hmm.
To your exact point, sometimes that operating partner that's kind of their talent partner, they're in even more of the flow than any one given partner is. They're doing, sometimes because they're across the entire portfolio at Lightspeed or Norwest. So sometimes they're doing like 5 searches a month. And so
Hmm.
to your point, search firms really want to impress them.
Right, right.
So getting them on a call sometimes is even more valuable than having your board partner on the call.
So last question about the actual search. How long would it take to find a executive? I know it ranges, but what would you say is the average? Because again, this is something I talk to people and they say, "Oh, I'm going to get my new CMO and I hired a search firm and I'll have them in the seat next month."
Yes.
I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah, I
I don't
don't
know
know
if
about
that's
that.
going to happen.
Yeah. You and I are very similar, David. I mean, it does depend on obviously, I'm just gonna just to make sure that there's the appropriate level of nuance here. So obviously, it's gonna depend on the economy a lot. It's gonna depend on the role you're trying to fill because frankly, sometimes it's easier to find certain roles. It's easier to find candidates available for say so for me because and we're going to talk about this later, but I'm very focused on product. So for me, I have very, very high standards and I understand certain roles better than others,
Hmm.
which may mean though that for me, sometimes I have to find like the perfect person who can partner with me because I know I'm going to have strong opinions in an area,
Mm,
as opposed to say sales where I'm maybe a little less opinionated. So what I found is certain roles. So first of all, stepping back to answer your question, the answer is you take however long it takes to find the perfect candidate. And
great answer. Great.
yes,
I love that answer.
yeah. So sometimes it gets uncomfortable. I mean, to find the right chief product officer, it took us, we were 6 months in that process. And by the end of it, I had one of my board members calling me saying, "You're too picky." They really did. They were saying, "You're just too picky. You've got to, at some point, you've got to recognize that the cost of going without a leader in this area is the cumulative cost there is going to start to outweigh the benefit of finding the perfect candidate.
Mm,
And you're getting stretched too thin playing both roles as the CEO and CPO." And so I did eventually kind of have to take that into account. We did hire someone and it worked, but it didn't work as long as I think either of us would have liked. So
mm,
it ended up being kind of, we were both right. The board member who recommended we take action, that person was totally right because the person we ended up hiring really revolutionized Spiff. I mean, they put us on a totally different
mm.
trajectory. I literally feel like we were kind of playing like little league ball before this person joined, and they moved us into the majors. But at the same time, it didn't end up being a long-term fit. And
Mm.
so, in a way, we maybe could have found an even better long-term fit. But I'm glad that we did take the advice of the board member ultimately and kind of
Yeah.
moved after
Yeah.
several months.
But it takes, to your point, I mean, it can take 6 months,
Yes.
and the answer is it should really take as long as it needs to. When I had some failed exec hires, my head of recruiting said, I want to sit down with you and go through all the searches we've ever done and which have been successful and which haven't. And then we looked at all the attributes of the search. And basically, what we found is every search that we rushed, in summary, the searches that we rushed because I was playing two roles at once, three roles at once,
Yes.
everyone failed. Not some of
Wow.
them. It was an amazing exercise to
Wow.
go through, actually, and it was because of what you said, which is I was playing CMO, chief people officer, CEO,
Yes.
and so we needed to hire people, and I acted too quickly because of my own fear of doing all these jobs,
Yes.
and so I just, that answer of as long as it takes, I think actually is the right answer. But to put in people's minds, that could be as much as 6 months, which
Yes.
is a long time.
Yep.
um,
Yep.
so next thing I want to talk about the product piece, because I think that that's something I think in the past when we've talked, you said you've written the first lines of code, in for all the different products that you've built, which is something I dream of being able to do, which I don't know how to code at all. So maybe we could talk a little bit about that, and but especially with Spiff, I mean, at that point in your career, you could go hire whoever you wanted to go and build the product. Why write the first lines of code? Why be so close to product? Like, maybe just talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah. I mean, I'm obsessed with, so every CEO has a different opinion on this, I feel like, but of well, I guess it has a different way of modeling how at the CEO, just stepping back, the CEO job is so fascinating because you can see different people succeed in this role that are so wildly different. Do you know what I mean? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
you can see folks that are just sales machines, but don't know the first thing about product. They can often succeed in the CEO role. You can see, I do think there's been an archetype shift a little bit away from that. It seems like and I'm putting on my business history hat here for 2 seconds. It seems guys 60s, 70s, 80s CEOs were these larger than life sales figures. It seems like with the shift towards tech being kind of the dominant force in our economy, it seems like CEOs have migrated more and more towards these. They look a lot more like engineers now. They're starting
Mm-hmm.
to kind of migrate away from this dominant sales personality to being this like problem solver in chief. And so I do think you see a lot more product focused CEOs that that are revered, like Steve Jobs or even like a Mark Zuckerberg, a for whatever you think about this person, Elon Musk. They're very engineering focused. They're in the weeds. I'm I'm definitely personally passionate about what I give to my customers, so much so that I want to be involved in every aspect of what they receive. I feel like that product
Mm,
is the deepest reflection of the value I'm trying to create. And so, again, this is an area where I like to be involved in the absolute details, the fit and finish. When I'm providing a piece of software to someone, I I like almost like to think about it like I'm creating some old world instrument, like a Stradivarius violin or something. And I want software is amazing because you can give the same at the click of a button, you can give the same product to millions of people with no additional marginal cost. But because of that, I think it's even more important that you are really involved in the fit and finish of that
mm,
product. Does it do is it really the most elegant solution out there? Has it been thought through deeply about, all of the ways in which it's extensible and it's easy to use and it plays nice with other solutions on the market? And that's something that I just haven't been willing to delegate away. So yes, I don't regret it at all. And in fact, I think it's core to how I succeed as a CEO is to be involved all the way down to the engineering level. I want to understand at the engineering level what's holding this product together. How scalable is it? How extensible is it? How easy is it going to be to add onto it? I think that's a big thing. I got burned early in my career, David, where I started a company and it had a lot of technical debt associated
mm,
with it, which
mm,
which basically meant that it was very expensive to add new features onto that product. And it nearly killed the company. We were able to get to an exit, but it nearly killed the company. And after that, I became really obsessed with trying to understand the product pretty deeply, even at an engineering level, so that I could make sure that I I I feel like in many ways for a technology product, the key to success is how fast and easily you can extend that product,
mm,
how
mm.
fast and easily you can add to it without taking anything away from what was previously built. So I really focus on that aspect of a product, and I feel
So
like
let me
it's been a
ask you.
success.
So, first of all, are you a trained engineer? Did you
No,
go to
I'm
school to be an
self-taught.
engineer?
I'm self-taught, which is dangerous, and a lot of folks will, and I've certainly had my share of CTOs who have found it disconcerting and concerning that the CEO wants to be involved at the level that I've been involved at. So, you know, and I get it. I get it. I really do because I'll never be an engineer at the level that so many of the engineers are that I've worked with. But yeah,
Hmm.
so I'm
Well,
self.
one of the things with Spiff specifically, I have heard from customers how amazing the product is, how easy it is to use, which I think is a testament to what you're talking about. Um, I guess even for myself, like how do you do that? Like, how do you get so close to the product? Is it sitting in on engineering meetings? Is it you're the one doing QA on the product, all the way into tactically, how do you stay so close? Because I actually do think I agree with you. Everything you said, I agree with. And I found that um, I always got, I loved being in the product, but over time, I just got
Pulled out.
further and further away.
Yeah.
How do you tactically do that?
Yeah. And I think that's natural, David. Like, I don't think a CEO should be coding every day when a company's, you know, 10, 20, 100 million in ARR. I mean, at some point, at some point, that's not at all going to be the highest and best use of your time. Um, and probably well before 10 million in ARR. I mean, I, I think I think though that once you've helped to lay the foundation, one thing I think again on this technical debt point, the foundations of a software product are often endure for a very, very long period of
Hmm.
time. And once you've been involved in understanding those foundations, you could literally kind of go on vacation for a year, come back, and you will still understand the core of how the system works. And I think that answers kind of your other question, which is
Mm-hmm.
how do you stay close? Well, I view once you've kind of got that executive team in place, a lot of what I view the CEO's role, a lot of what I think is the most important part of a CEO's role is to stay laser focused on the most important problem or problems of a company. And a lot of times, the most important problem or problems of a company can be technical. And if that's true, you should be involved in those meetings. You should be understanding. Sorry, if it's a technical product that you're building, then a lot of times the most important problems are technical. And that means you should be involved in the solutioning of those of the, of that problem. And so I will invite myself or be involved in pretty technical conversations around key aspects of the product. Again, I think this is part of that transition to a CEO being thinking more like an engineer, where they actually are involved in, hey, how do I s- how do we think about um, a core differentiator for our product? Well, maybe a core differentiator for our product, since we're up against competition that is significantly better funded than we are, maybe we have to make really tough decisions around what we're not going to do and at where we're going to limit our scope of what we offer, but where we're going to go spike and we're going to go really
Mm.
deep and be much stronger than the competition. And a lot of those decisions have to be made pretty deep in the understanding of how a product's built, because you're making trade-off decisions all the time of like, where's our best return on investment? Is it going to be on really focusing on this aspect of the product or this other aspect of the product? And so, yeah, I think that I would, in summary, I would stay very close to my engineering team. I I feel like my CTO is in many ways, I think a lot of non-technical CEOs are kind of scared of their CTO. They're kind of like, oh, they do their thing over there in that magic box. And I just try to create an environment that's conducive there. And I think that also creates lots of problems because it creates a privileged culture around the engineers and development. And I think it also means that you can't push back. You kind of just take their word as truth. So I actually look for technical leaders that understand that I'm not going to leave them alone. They don't get they of all everybody on the executive team. You've got your head of marketing, you got your head of sales. They know I'm going to be up in their grill asking them tough questions. I think a lot of CTOs think that they're just going to get a pass because they can say something really complicated and hard to understand. And then the CEO is just going to kind of say, okay, well, I guess that must be the truth. And I look for technical leaders that are really good and patient with me, asking a lot of tough questions and being like, wait, I don't understand that. You said something super technical there that went over my head. You're going to need to dumb that down to a third grade level because I don't understand that. And
Mm.
we're building a software product. So your role is absolutely critical. And it's really critical that I understand everything that is important about what you're doing. So I need you to slow way down, talk to me like a 3-year-old and help me understand that problem. Um, I'm technical enough that they don't really need to talk to me like a 3-year-old. But even if I weren't technical, I would kind of insist on it, if that makes sense, David.
Mm. I think that is good advice for people who I that point about putting the CTO and the engineering team kind of in a corner and saying, "Well, I'm not technical, so I'm going to hire someone. They're going to hire their people. They're going to go run at it. Even if you don't understand it innately, let's say you can still go and have those conversations with them, and it's your company, so
Yes,
you have the right to understand, and you should understand that." Um, let's talk a little bit about the Salesforce acquisition because that was obviously a big deal for you and for the company, and I think for Salesforce because this was a product that all their customers needed and wanted, and so can you maybe talk about what that process was like
sure.
in terms of how did that even come about? They were an investor in Spiff. Was that how it came about? Was it something else? What was that process like?
Yeah, sure. And and let me know if there's anything specific you want me to focus on. But so Spiff, I think we made a couple of key decisions early on with the help of Sean Jacobson at Norwest, one of our board members, where we had some decisions early on around, hey, do we want to involve Salesforce or not? Because with with the particular product that Spiff was building, which is a commission engine, it's, as you mentioned, it's a solution for automating commissions, motivating sales reps, and helping them to see their commissions in real time while they're building out an opportunity in a CRM or something like that. So we knew right up front, hey, we feel like this is a much bigger market. This is one of these deceptively large markets. The average company spends 10% of their entire revenue on commissions. People don't know that, but sales commissions are a gigantic part of a typical company's budget. And so we felt like this had an IPO path. We really did. Like and I don't think we would have raised money from Lightspeed and Norwest and very, very large funds if they didn't believe that we had an IPO path. So I think all of us around the table felt like there was a realistic IPO path here. But we also knew that however likely that was or wasn't, probably an even substantially larger likelihood of an outcome for an exit for Spiff was to sell to someone like a CRM vendor. And when you start to look at the potential acquirers at scale for a commission software platform, I mean, Salesforce is at the top of that list in every possible way. There's probably a couple of others. There's a possibility that Microsoft could get in could want to do it. There's a possibility that Oracle already kind of has a solution. There's a possibility for, say, a Workday or something like this. But like most CEOs, I had kind of mapped out our acquisition space, and Salesforce was by far the best and most likely acquirer. So when you have an acquisition space that's heavily slanted in the direction of one player, some alarm bells should go off in your mind, because you don't want to cozy up to them too quickly because they can end up really limiting your exit outcomes, and because they can basically, if they're the main buyer and you let them as an investor and they have information rights and other things, that can really, as that can really stifle the the desire for other vendors to look at you as an acquisition target. So early on, we had this really interesting dilemma where we're like, hey, do we want to approach them or not? And I think we came down pretty categorically on the side of, yes, we want to, and we want to do it early, but we want to do it on our terms. And so we made sure that we raised money from them in very, very competitive rounds, where we made it clear to them that some of their competitors were also interested in investing in Spiff, which was true. And we welcomed them into rounds where we had, I remember for the Series A, I want to say that we had 6 or 7 very viable term sheets. And so Salesforce wanted to put more money into that round. They wanted to put like a factor of 2 or 3 times more money into the round than we let them put into the round. And so we felt like we were in the driver's seat, at least early on. Now, we were so lucky because that relationship ended up being the gift that kept on giving. And when SaaS markets kind of went sideways, they ended up leading our Series C. And they had already reached out to us before that time and had expressed an interest in us as an acquisition target.
Yeah.
So we knew quite early on. I mean, I would say 3.5 years into Spiff's journey, we knew that Salesforce was pretty interested in a potential acquisition scenario with Spiff. So that's kind of how it came about. Now, I'll say one other thing. You might think, oh, well, the ventures team or the corp dev team of a company is where you get most of your traction for acquisition. I've, at least in this particular instance, and actually in almost every instance that I've seen where I've sold a company, it's actually someone in the product org or in the business itself that is the true driver of the acquisition. And that was true as well for Salesforce. So we were super lucky to work with some really amazing individuals at Salesforce who were interested in uh, this space, and
Right.
they were working through the corp dev team to talk to us. And so,
Yeah, I actually talked
yes,
to a found that's again, it's amazing nuggets of advice because I talked to a founder last week and they said, "Oh, I'm ready to sell my company, and I'd like to sell it now." And I
yes,
said, "Well, that's not, that's going to be hard to do." And they said, "Well, I made a list of all the corp dev people at all the companies that could buy us, and I'm
no,
going to reach out to all of them." And I said, what you said, which is they don't know, like the corp dev person doesn't know where you're going to fit. If someone if in the business is not vouching for you and saying, "I want that product, I need that, it's on my 2-year roadmap, it's on my 1-year roadmap," whatever the case may
you're so
be,
right, David.
the corp dev person, I mean, they're gonna be your air traffic controller and
They
kind of
will.
helping you through the process, but they're not going to be the one vouching for you, going to the CEO and saying, "We're going to go buy this company," because they need the business. And I think saying that's a really important point.
Yep. I agree with everything you just said. Like, I would double underscore it. And that's why it's important to build those relationships in advance. Companies are companies can be bought or sold, but you wanna
Mm-hmm.
be bought, you don't wanna be sold. And so
Mm-hmm.
this person that you were talking to, I mean, my heart goes out to them because it sounds like they're kind of more in sales mode, which is
Mm-hmm.
not an ideal, optimal out place to be. And they are gonna have to go through that corp dev channel, which, yeah, to your exact point, minimizes the chance of a successful acquisition. It's it's a suboptimal way to go about getting an acquisition offer. So yeah, I think I would just highlight that it's really important to try and make connections with potential acquirers in the business side of their operation in advance of any time that you think you might want to be bought.
So this is so at Better Cloud, I did this with a number of big companies and all very logical acquirers of the business. And one of the challenges I had, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this, is I had this kind of nervousness of engaging with the business with these companies that of course could be acquirers, but they could also be competitors, to the business. How did you balance that? Or is it just that's the risk you take to build a relationship?
Yeah, I tend to find a couple things. I have a couple of points on that. One is we all deal with that. That's super natural, and I totally get it, and I agree with you. So there's no clear cut answer. Every CEO that grapples with that's gonna have to make their own decision. But I tend to find that people over that they worry about that a little too much. You're not gonna hop straight to having a conversation with a competitor to, "Hey, here's our financials, and here's our strategy for the year, and here's how we're planning on beating you." I mean, you're not that's not gonna happen. It's very, very unlikely to happen. Like, what is much more likely to happen is you're gonna have a conversation and a relationship with this person for a couple of years before an acquisition ever happens. And so I worry about that a lot less. Just go network, make a great you can compete, you can wanna rip someone's face off on the field, and then you can give them a I love the NBA, right? Because the NBA people they can get in fights during the game, and then after the game, they go and they're hugging each other, a lot of times. Not always true, but most of the time, they're shaking each other's hands, they're hugging each other. It's great to see you, great game. You can lose in the NBA finals to a team, and afterwards you can go give them a hug. I mean, so I think it's similar with your competitors. I mean, there's no reason why you can't day to day just want to destroy them, and kill them on the field. But off the field, have a ton of respect for what they're doing, and have a good relationship with them and meet with them and take them out to dinner and go to lunch. And, you
Hmm.
know, I wish I had done that much more in my career, honestly. And I did do it at Spiff. It's really neat. We have a really great competitor, actually. And I won't name names to preserve confidentiality, but they were venture backed by great funds, direct competitors, Spiff. And this time around, I think there was some bad blood in the early days of the two ventures, but we were able to put that bad blood behind us. And I ended up having a Zoom call with their CEO, and we ended up sharing kind of ideas about family stuff and how to deal with the pains of being a CEO and trying to be a dad. This person was he was becoming a new dad, and I ended up sending him a gift, and they kind of reciprocated it. So like we ended up having this kind of good relationship, but like no doubts about it, both of us wanted to literally put the other company
Right.
out of business if we could,
Right.
on the field.
Right.
Yeah.
When you think about this, these years at Spiff specifically, what is the biggest challenge that you ever faced, and did you overcome it? How or how not? What was that?
Yeah. The biggest challenge for us and specifically, I think I would say, and I know this is one that I've given this some thought, and I'm kind of there. We made it through COVID. That ended up being kind of a false challenge. It was like, wow, we were so scared, but it ended up going away. I think a similar one like that was SVB failure. We had 60 million bucks in the bank with SVB, and I remember driving in an Uber. I was driving back from a conference actually, and just not just realizing that I might wake up the next day and 60 million bucks might be gone, and somehow I just slept so easily that night. I don't know why. So I felt like it was going to be a blip, and it was a blip. So I think the bigger challenges for us, probably the biggest challenge for us was actually, a couple things. There was a time where we found it very, very difficult to fundraise. So we went into kind of a nuclear winter a couple times. We had to fundraise around the pandemic. We had right after we ended up closing around in like June of 2020. So we had to fundraise around the pandemic. I think we had to fundraise during this kind of weird slow session that we had with our Series C. So I think there was some fundraising stuff, and then I had my CMO resign at one point in time, and sh- she was such an incredible performer, and it really caught me off guard, and it was actually related to my management style, which cut so deep, it hurt. And I think, we were able to weather those challenges, and I was able to send this very deeply personal letter to my CMO that I think just gave her enough of a pause that she didn't actually resign that weekend, and she gave me the benefit of the doubt a little bit, and then I think it's laid the groundwork for some deep humility that I was able to find, I think, and it really helped to restore that relationship.
Hmm.
So I think of all those, I think probably I would say the two biggest challenges, sorry, I just got to go with two, would probably be fundraising in very, very difficult environments, and then, living through the potential loss of my chief marketing officer at a really key time when
Hmm.
we needed her badly.
On that front, I think that knowing that it's you that is, usually it's some other reason, and knowing that it's you that is the reason that they're leaving must be really um, difficult. I don't know. I haven't had that exact experience, but I've had the experience where, my team has done a 360 on me and come back with feedback, and you read the feedback, and it's kind of like
So painful.
you so painful. You don't even realize that you're doing these things that now that 12 people have said that you do, and you realize all these tendencies that
You're
it's
probably an amazing leader, David. Just the fact you would do that and the way you respond to it, the way you just did. That's awesome. And I've lived that exact experience. Yes. And I love that you mentioned the 12 people, because the natural defense mechanism of this, it's one or two people, it's one person, yeah, this isn't actually how I,
exactly.
right. And then it's like, nope, it's 12 people that said that's how you are. And so you got to realize, yep, that's something I got to address.
Exactly. Actually, I had a leader who we did that same 360 for, and we gave it to them, and they said exactly what you said. They said, "There's no way that everyone said that. There's no way." And they actually, I can't make. They went to everyone they thought it was anonymous, but they went to everyone they thought gave feedback one-on-one to ask them if that was their feedback. Of course, we did it anonymously on purpose, and
Yes.
they went and did that one by one and grilled people. Did you say this? Did you say? We ended up firing that
Yeah, that's
person, because that was just. But to your being self-aware, they just couldn't come to grips with that they
yes.
had any weaknesses, and that people would feel that way. So with Spiff and now being part of Salesforce, what are you excited about for the future of Spiff inside of Salesforce?
It's so great. So first of all, Salesforce has got to have one of the best cultures in the world of software. I mean, it's an incredible place to be. Their M&A engine is really, really high performing. I don't even know how to explain it. It's been so eye-opening. I didn't even know that a company could have a function that runs that smoothly around M&A, because I think of M&A as so infrequent. With Salesforce, it's much more frequent, obviously, but I'm saying I think about it as just this like infrequent enough event that there really isn't, it wouldn't be systematized, but Salesforce has really systematized it. So they've got it down. And so I would say, honestly, the thing I'm most excited about is my passion. Like a lot of entrepreneurs, it's a weird mix of upside for yourself and for people you care about, but also deeply, deeply a passion about customer problem that you're obsessed with. And that problem hasn't been solved yet. We're solving it. And I think we're doing the best job of anyone, I think. But there's still a lot to be done to solve that problem perfectly. And so I'm actually really excited about Salesforce because we now have significantly more resources than we had before. They've added to our engineering team. They have turbocharged our vision, and they've challenged our vision in a couple of key ways. But the way they challenge it is, how can we? Their challenge is so awesome. It's like they think we're thinking too small. So they're like, how do we help you think much bigger? I mean, my boss at Salesforce, Kathan Karkanis, who's the head of Sales Cloud, I mean, he is constantly challenging me to think bigger. And I mean, I couldn't be happier from that perspective of, I think in many ways I would be less happy having IPO'd Spiff than I would be working for Salesforce, because again, I feel like they've created this platform that has literally helped us to explode in terms of the number of leads and deals and pipeline that I
Well,
think we
I can
can.
only imagine.
Yeah.
I mean, I can. I talked to a company I remember back in the day who they sold to Cisco. They were doing like 15 million of ARR when they sold to Cisco, and within a year they were doing 150 million of ARR
Gosh,
in the same product. And they
that
said,
is
when
so
you have a
neat.
platform, when you have a machine, when you have the brand, when you have, to your point, the team, the engineering team, the resources, they're like, it's crazy. And you think about that. It took them, that company, I think, 8 years to get to 15 million, and then a year to get to
In a year.
150
Can you
million.
imagine that, David? Oh my
It's
gosh,
like,
that is so cool.
but that's where you understand how a company like Salesforce or Cisco or whoever, they can
Totally.
do acquisitions like this, and they're paying for those acquisitions not immediately, but you can see how they're paying for those very quickly, because they know that if it drops in the distribution engine and the everything that they have, how big it can get. And so anyway, that's awesome. um, let's transition a little bit more to you personally. Maybe tell me first, like, where are you from originally?
Yeah, I'm originally I was born in Texas, grew up and then moved to Utah, where I have some long-term family connections. Then lived in Arizona till I was 14, and then moved back to Utah. So I kind of can answer that question a couple different ways, but yeah, I kind of feel like in many ways, like my most formative young years were in Phoenix, Arizona, growing up, but almost equally Utah as well, because I'm kind of I was there from 14 until my 20s, and so
Mhm.
and I live there now.
And growing up, did you know you wanted to be an entrepreneur?
No, I think as a young kid, I'm not one of those entrepreneurs. I'm not one of those entrepreneurs that was, doing a lemonade stand or,
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
Cuban, where I'm like, I was out selling like crazy in college. No, probably not. But I was very technically inclined. I was learning how to develop as at a young age. So, I was, I remember my mom w- got me an Apple computer and I was learning how to write software on that at a young age. And so I've always been technically inclined. I just didn't really know I was going to be an entrepreneur. And I was really obsessed in college with like the consulting path. I ended up working for a consulting firm. I got an offer to go do investment banking and turned that down and worked for the consulting firm in Boston. And that was during the big dot-com boom.
Hmm.
And I became totally convinced actually in the crisis. It's funny because when everything was going to hell in a handbasket around me in terms of all these startups dying, I was actually totally convinced that that was just chapter one of that tech was going to really overtake the entire economy. So when I
Hmm.
went to business school and I did get an MBA, which I know is like kind of going out of fashion. I was like, I really wanted to get a great MBA. I went to Harvard and had a great time with my classmates, very few of which are actually entrepreneurs, by the way, almost none. But but yes, I remember kind of feeling like, hey, I really want to be involved with technology because I feel like that's the future. And I tried to get a job in VC and failed. And that's really what pushed me into the entrepreneurial path. And oh man, I'm so glad that I'm not a VC. I think that's so boring compared to being an entrepreneur, to be honest.
What was your first ever job? Was it consulting?
My first ever job was actually, do you remember, this will date me, and you're, I think, much younger than I am, but there was a company called Word Perfect
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
they're like direct competitor to Microsoft Word, but they were
Hmm.
based in Utah. And my first job was I worked in the mailroom. My grandpa worked in the mailroom and he was able to get me a job basically. And so because I was one of the younger kids, I was 16 or actually, sorry, I was like 15, I think no, I probably was 15 or 16 at the time. And they just had me like delivering mail and buy like the heavy stuff. So I would carry computers around to folks because I was the younger guy. So it'd
Wow.
make me do all the heavy deliveries. But yeah, that was my first.
That's good. That's good. Um, so you've been successful, had a number of successful companies, but you keep going. You keep doing it. You keep going through all the pain and the suffering. What is it that motivates you at your core?
Yeah. Oh man. I've thought a lot about that. I think at my core, I think like the most important thing, and I'm curious about this for you, David, too. I really am. So I don't know if anybody's I'd love to turn the question on you. I don't know if I can do that, but maybe afterwards if I could
I'll
hear.
tell you. I'll tell you. I'll tell you. Mine. I'm very open about mine, and I don't know where it comes from, but mine is people telling me that I can't do something and proving people wrong about that is
Mm,
for some reason.
it's addictive too.
Since I was a kid, I don't know. I don't know why. I have that, and like that's like all I need in order to get super motivated. And
Yes.
it's almost like I seek that out in some cases, like in the early days of being turned down, I don't know how many times from fundraising. I just it like the motivation for me, it was getting a round done and making sure that the first investors regretted, the ones that said no, regretted not doing the investment.
I
And my greatest
love it.
satisfaction ever was I was at an event, a panel of VCs, and they asked one of the VCs what deal got away, what's the one deal that got away, and she didn't see me in the audience, and she said, oh, the number one deal that got away from me was the Better Cloud, Series A or whatever it was. And
Wow.
it was like the most satisfaction I've ever of everything. That was like
You probably
the
felt
most
so
satisfaction.
good.
I felt great.
Oh, that is such a great story. Yeah, I think for me, it comes down to it comes down to that camaraderie you get. That feeling you get with that group of founders, there's something so special about that, David. It's
Mm,
that, and I don't mean this in a gender specific way, but it's that like band of brothers feeling,
mm-hmm,
like you've been through battle together, you're battle tested and hardened. And those relationships to me are so powerful and core to my career. I think about outside of my career, I try to have those relationships with my family, and those are the most important things in my life. And so, but you end up spending so much of your time trying to make money because you have to. And so when you're in your money making mindset or mode, I want to create a similar feeling of like I'm in this with people that I deeply admire and respect, and we're gonna have an incredible adventure together that's gonna be really hard, but it's gonna bring us together in really
mm,
special ways. So
mm.
something around that really motivates me. I mean, I love the customer problem, but the thing that makes me want to go back and do it again isn't actually solving the customer problem. Sometimes it is, but sometimes that's a piece of it, but it's more that feeling of that deep feeling of care and trust and kinship that you get with the folks that do it with you.
I really like that. I feel that. I feel like the connections I have with those people. Your band of brothers is a good. It's like you're in the trenches. I mean, it's the best way to describe it. And when you get through that, the good and the bad, you remember fondly. Actually, in a weird, in a weird
Yes.
way, and so I like that. Um, so last question for you: what is one new thing that you've learned about yourself in the last year?
This one, yeah, this one's a little painful, and I'll share it with you. And so for the listeners, like David and I connected briefly before this. We're talking about our kids a little bit, and You know, I I always felt, David, like I was balancing being a CEO with being a dad really well. I honestly did. I felt like, look, I'm present at the ballet recitals. I'm present at all the soccer tournaments. I'm going on camping trips with my kids. I feel really close to my kids. Like I love them deeply, um and I honestly kind of looked at like previous generations models, like my grandparents and others, and I'm like, man, they were hardly even involved in their kids' lives. Like I felt like I was, if I were going to give myself a grade, I would have been like, yeah, I'm getting in solid A minus, maybe, sometimes, but I'm doing well. I'm involved in their lives. I love them. They love me. And I've had, at least in one case, I've had a situation where it's become clear that I wasn't enough as a dad,
Mm,
and that I needed to be doing a lot more. And I think that has been something I've learned about myself that's been super painful, to be honest. Really painful, like much more painful than the pain I felt in potentially failing as an entrepreneur, and,
mm.
in my career. So yeah, I don't know. I'm guessing there are some other CEOs out there that are juggling life and their family, and that I don't know. I hope they never can identify with this. I hope they don't have that, but they've got to at least on some level have asked themselves some similar questions. So I hope that's helpful,
Yeah.
and that's something
I mean,
I've learned has been hard.
I think so far in almost every conversation I've had with the CEO, whether we've talked about on the podcast or just on the side, everyone who has a family, this is a topic that comes up, and I've been very open about for me, I first 5 years of Better Cloud, I was traveling. I mean, I did over 150 flights in 2018 or 2019. I was on the road all the time. I didn't see my kids. I didn't see my wife. I didn't. And even when I came back to being present, like you said, only after I stepped back from operating day to day did I realize that actually when I thought I was present, I was never present. And you do
Mm,
feel that difference. But the question that I ask other people and I've asked myself is, would I have been as successful generally in my career if I didn't make some of the trade offs that I made? And my answer has been no. I don't think that I could have, at least in the early days. Maybe later stage, it's a little bit different when you have an executive team and you have, maybe it's a little bit different. But I don't think in the early days, I'm not sure if it's almost too all consuming in your brain. You could physically be there, but it's hard to be really present when you're trying to build a business. At least that's my opinion. Not to say it's okay.
I'm not justifying it.
But I think that's what I hear from literally every person, whether they say it out loud or not. In private, that's what people say, and it's hard.
Great.
It's hard, and especially if your kids are old enough to recognize. Mine. I was lucky that they were so young that they didn't even realize. Now, when I get on the road and start traveling, they'll say, "Oh, how long are you going for? Where are you? Will you be able to call?" They understand that dynamic a lot more.
I loved your point really quick about the stage of the company, because I think you're right that later stage companies you maybe can, but in the early stage companies, I am right there with you. It just takes a lot of work, and it's hard. I mean, there's trade-offs that you make, and I've asked myself, so does that mean I shouldn't? Because I think if you're going to be an entrepreneur and you want to succeed, that might be one of those hard realities that no one wants to hear, but it's
exactly no one wants to hear it.
No one wants to
hear it because it's painful. I mean, it's terrible.
It's terrible. But I think, but I think on the flip side, it's like, okay, so I've asked myself, so should I have been a different profession? And I think that's a legitimate question entrepreneurs should ask themselves, which is, hey, it may not always, you're going to have to do, there's going to be some sacrifice that will be painful. And, and I'm not even sure you'll look at it as worth it at some point. So you got to ask yourself that question.
Yeah. Where, if people want to connect with you, what is the best way for them to do that? What's the best way for them to find out about Spiff?
Yes, Spiff, easy peasy. I mean, they can connect with me at Jeron, Jeron, Daniel Paul at gmail.com. So Jeron Daniel Paul at gmail.com. Happy to chat and happy to help in whatever way I can. I've certainly found a lot of folks that are in the sales tech space that I'm having, I can have great conversations with them because I'm at Salesforce. So a lot of times I can help connect them to the right folks at Salesforce, and Salesforce is an absolute powerhouse in this space. So for any listeners that are kind of focused in that area, I'd love to connect with you. And then at Salesforce, it's pretty easy. You just go to spiff.com, still works. You can spiff.com and you can request a demo or reach us that way. You can also find us through the Salesforce site as well. If you just search, they've kept our brand name and they have said that they're going to continue to keep it. So it'll be,
really?
It's Salesforce Spiff is the technical.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I like that, Salesforce Spiff.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Jeron. Really, we covered a lot of important topics, and I appreciate so much you being vulnerable and being open about the ups and downs. I think we hit on a couple things today that are probably major unlocks for people.
Awesome. Well, David, I'm a huge fan. I think you know that already, and just so grateful to be able to spend time with you as well. Thanks so much for giving me the opportunity.
Awesome. Well, for those of you that are listening, there's a lot to take away from what was shared today, and whether it's the surrounding yourself with top talent, being close to the product, the challenges of work-life balance of when you're running a big company, a fast-growing company. So hopefully you take something away from this, and if you enjoyed the episode, I'd appreciate if you shared it with your network. So thank you very much, and see you next time for another episode of Not Another CEO Podcast. That's a wrap for this week's episode of Not Another CEO Podcast. Thanks for joining. For show notes and more, please visit notanotherceopodcast.com. We'll see you next week.